But go ahead and start. Okay. Tonight, we've been talking about the star calendar. And the questions come up more than once about how do we know what stars are in it, how they're arranged, what ones go on what day. I mean, the whole star calendar. As a review of where the idea came from, and tonight we will discuss 10 criteria to answer those questions. That's the whole lesson tonight. So hopefully you're interested in that. But the Enoch calendar with the 4 seasons, the regular Enoch calendar, has seven chapters describing it in the book of Enoch. There's about 2 or 3 verses, maybe half a page, where he mentions a star calendar. He doesn't even call it a calendar, but he just says the stars represent men, the servants of God, righteous servants. In fact, maybe not men, some are women, so servants of God. And he says there's 364 of the stars, just like on the Enoch calendar. It's 364 days. And he says there's 4 big ones that are like the 4 equinox and solstice points on the calendar, so that it's in the same kind of a pattern, and divided into 12 groups of stars, which are going to be the zodiac constellations. And that's about all he says. And I went for many years thinking it would be impossible to ever figure that out. So I didn't even try. And I forget now what got me started. You could get the first 4. The first 4, there are the 4 big angels that are the 4 corners of the earth. The ancients talked about 4 big stars that were the royal stars, and the 4 that are 90 degrees apart from each other on the ecliptic. And we've already talked about them in this class. There's the star Regulus in Leo the lion, which is like the 12 o'clock star. There's Antares in Scorpio, which is the 3 o'clock star. There's Fomalhaut down in the bottom of the stream of Aquarius, also in the head of the fish, which is the 6 o'clock star. And there's Aldebaran, the seer star in the eye of the bull, which is the 9 o'clock star. So those 4 big ones were pretty easy, and the 4 angels. But how are you going to know of all the stars in the sky what stars there are? There's about 4,000 visible at a certain latitude, not all on the same night. Half of them are down, maybe on the same night, 2,500 tops. So there's going to be, let's go back to the 4,000 because this is going to be for all year. We got to pick, first of all, we got to pick 364 stars out and then figure out the order. So let's just start going through the criteria. Criterion number 1 is we're on slide 357. And tonight we'll be jumping around instead of all in order because 7 criteria were discovered first, and I thought it was done. And so I put them all in a row in the tutorial. And then as the tutorial was continuing being made, 3 more were discovered. So we'll actually, I may go back and change this tutorial to put them all in order, and I may not. Who knows what I'll do. Okay, first criterion. To be included in the star calendar, the star must be in a constellation of the original set of 48. So we need to know what that set is. Now, there are 12 zodiac constellations, and each of those has three associated figures called decans, which help explain meanings. This set has been restored from both the Greek and Persian sets. So it turns out the Greeks, the Persians, and the Babylonians are the three main ancient groups. Each had what they said was a set of constellations. They all had 48. They seemed to know that the number 48 was important. And they all had basically the same 12 in the zodiac. It's the Persians who, the Egyptians also had a lot of constellations, but they got them messed up. They originally had them right from Abraham, and they passed them on to the Greeks through Pythagoras, who was a temple priest, and others. And they sent a globe and things like that over to, anyway, they got preserved by the Greeks, let's just say that. But then they got changed by the Egyptians, and by most of the ones in the temples are hippopotamus and anyway, a bunch of different things that do not look like at all like the originals. So part of it is to know what has been transferred successfully down from the ancients. The three main groups, Persians, Greeks, and Babylonians, all pretty much agreed on most of the constellations. They differed on about 4 or 5. The Greeks lost one of the 12 big ones, the Libra, the scales. It turns out the scorpion is holding the scales between its claws. Well, if you didn't know that, you could lose it entirely and just say those are the claws. And that's what the Greeks did. In the place of Libra, they just said, these are the claws. It was a separate constellation called the claws. Fortunately, they made a list of all the stars they had taken out from the old lists they had, and I was able to put those stars back in, so I know exactly which stars and reconstruct the scales. The constellation of the Little Prince that represents Christ, the infant prince, was completely lost when one Greek named Conan changed the constellation and called it Bernice's hair in honor of the queen. I'm sure he got his new telescope grant or whatever he was getting, but he traded in an important constellation for it. So with that in mind, I took it as my job. You can tell I've taken this whole thing as my job. I took it as my job to restore lost constellations and to figure out which the original 48 are. This slide shows my best understanding and what I believe, I have a lot of reason to believe is correct, of the original 48 constellations. So it has to be a star in these constellations. Okay, we go to 358, criterion 2. To be included in the star calendar, a star must be in a good constellation or part. No one is born on an evil or unlucky star day. So, the stars from the hero Perseus are in, but the Medusa is out. See, Perseus is carrying the decapitated head of the Medusa, which is really a monster beast. And you don't want to be born, this just seemed reasonable to me. You don't want to be born on the day of the head of the Medusa. I mean, talked about people say they're born on a lucky star or unlucky star, and anyway, they don't need that. And I felt, by the way, on all of these rules, I felt very inspired, and it's almost like they were shown to me. So that was one of the rules. And most constellations are either all good or all bad. But this is one that has both in it. Now, there's a lot more stars. If you just look at the stars in those 48 constellations, there's about 1,000. Ptolemy made a list of all of the stars that are officially on the Greek lists of what's included in those 48 constellations. And his star catalog has about 1,000 stars. So to get it down to 364, about 2/3 of those stars have to be eliminated. So this is, and it turns out that several constellations by this rule are eliminated. So of the 48, I believe it's only 42 constellations which are represented, because the other 8 are bad guys. And now, so we got rid of some of them. Now we got rid of the bad ones. Now let's go to criteria 3, which is slide 359. To be included in the star calendar, a star must be either bright or in a meaningful spot in the figure, such as in the golden fleece of the ram. It turns out one of the dimmest stars of those included is like 5th magnitude. First magnitude of the very bright ones is 15 first magnitude stars visible in the northern skies and in the latitudes of the north where these constellations were put together. And by the way, you can tell roughly where they were created, and it's about the latitude of Missouri, where Enoch might have been. And you can tell the date they were created, and it's about 2500 BC, or maybe 3000, about when Enoch lived. And so that's where the constellations are. Well, first magnitude is very bright. Second is dimmer. The stars in the Big Dipper are all 2nd magnitude. 5th magnitude is not visible except on a dark night. But the Savior is born on the day of new, that thing that looks like a V is a new in Greek, Aries. And it's in the fleece of the ram. The golden fleece represents resurrection. That's his birth star, and he is the resurrection. And the whole myth about the ram and chasing the golden fleece on Jason and the Argonauts, it was to get the resurrection. So it's an important star, and it's one of the 364, even though it's very dim. So there's a few dim stars that are well placed. And all the bright stars. The bright stars will end up being first major holy day stars. Next slide, 360, is criterion 4. To be included in the star calendar, a star must be in a simple, recognizable stick figure, as well as fulfilling the other criteria. Now, this was a huge breakthrough. Everybody sort of sees stars as stick figures. This calendar is made for the average man to use, just like Enoch calendar. It might be priests that regulate it and know when to put in the extra years. But the man on the street knows if that's the calendar being used by the culture. He knows that there's 4 seasons, there's 2 solstice days, 2 equinox days. Every week starts on a Sunday, the year starts on a Sunday. 4 equal quarters. It's very simple. The man on the street can use it. The same thing for this star calendar. It might take an astronomer. The use of astronomers and calendars is to figure out the calendar so that an average man can use it without needing to be an astronomer. The astronomer does the hard work, but once it's done, just like on regular calendars, we can all have a little planning calendar without needing to know about suns and moons and stuff. With that in mind, those simple stick figures are extremely important. One of the toughest was the ship Argo, which, by the way, some of the constellations down in the underworld, which is below the ecliptic, some of them are not all that evil. And Argo is the ship with the men on it who are trying to get a better resurrection. They're like either celestial kingdom people, which is a whole lot of people, or even sons of perdition who have not been officially called that yet and have until the final judgment at the end of the 7,000 years to maybe move up and become a terrestrial person. Anyway, this ship is right down at the bottom. Even as one point in the sky represents the center of heaven, if you look at this picture on 360, there's a center point at the bottom from which lines radiate. That's like the center point of hell. This ship is right next to the center point of hell. This is really a kind of son of perdition kind of ship. Anyway, it's got huge number of stars. It has so many stars in it. Modern astronomers have broken it into 4 separate constellations. And so it's got, 50, you can see them all. There's 60, 70 stars there in this picture. Well, 40 or 50 at least. And most of these are the ones that are in Ptolemy's map. So all those stars are in the 1,000. This is not just all stars in the sky. This picture is made from Ptolemy's map. So there is a stick figure. It's not a perfect boat, but it's a simple stick figure of the brightest stars. And I put this in as an example of one of the worst pictures, actually, and one of the hardest to figure out. But there's other ways to help figure it out, other criteria. But anyway, all of the constellations. Oh, by the way, this is not even visible here now because of precession of the equinoxes. This is now only visible in south of the equator. Okay, next slide. Criterion 5, to be in the star calendar, one of the 364 available star days around the ecliptic must be open for it near its longitude. For instance, I talked about this once before, but now we're coming down to slots. Think of 364 slots around the ecliptic, which I'm pointing to with my the arrow here, which goes through the center of the path, which is the path of the sun, through the midst of the 12 zodiac constellations. By the way, the stars, a lot of the stars are in the 12 of the zodiac, but a star can be anywhere up in we just looked right down here at the south ecliptic pole where Argo is, or up at the north where the center of the dragon is. So every star, you can drop down a line straight to the ecliptic, and that's called the longitude going around to it. And for this, we're not too interested in the latitude. There's only 364 slots, each about 1 degree wide, for stars. So there's a little competition for which stars will fall into that slot. But this star has to be in a slot within a few days. It can be maybe 3 or 4 days either way of its slot, because sometimes there's a whole lot of stars right together, and sometimes there's no stars for a while. Anyway, they have to kind of share and do things like that. All right, we're going to move on. Criterion 6. The dragon represents God at the top of the heavens in the star calendar, and the serpent and scorpion are Christ as healer and judge. The serpent-type constellations that are above the earth, on the earth or above the earth. On the ecliptic represents the earth, and the part north of the ecliptic represents heaven. If it's a serpent, and a scorpion is considered a serpent, in that area, it can either be good or bad. Christ is the serpent on the staff by which you look at in your heel, but the serpent is also Satan. The dragon at the top of the sky is both God, and it's also Lucifer or Satan wanting to be at the top of the heavens, like it says in Isaiah, and wanting to usurp the position of God and claiming to be God. So you got to be careful in this. In the star calendar, they only represent the good guys because of criterion 2. So in the star calendar, the serpent is always God. Therefore, it's very, very holy. And we'll see later that all 12 stars in the serpent are on holy days, and the top 7 are on major holy days out of the 12. So that's important to know because, by the way, notice it's red. This is the same serpent that John saw in the book of Revelation at the top of the heavens. He doesn't call it, well, that's another story for another day. There's a lot of tricky stuff there. Criterion 7. Each of the 7 angels of God has a whole set of 7 constellations to tell his story. Now, let's first notice that 7 times 7 is 49. We said there were only 48 constellations, which was 12 times 4. So how do we get a 49th? Well, there's a couple of ways. So 2 or 3 of the constellations can divide in 2. The twins are divided in 2 here. Each one of those is one of the 7 angels. So here's the warrior and the champion are 2 twins. So there's 49 right there. The bull has the Pleiades, the 7 doves, on its back, and that divides into 2. So now we got 50. We got to get rid of one. On the regular 48, the healer and the serpent are 2 separate constellations, and now we put 2 together and just to the healer, and now we're back to 49. So anyway, that's how you get 49. Now, this came to me very strongly, and it came in there's a parable in the Doctrine and Covenants, and it said, what man having 12 sons will tell one to dress in fancy king's robes and tell another to dress in rags? And he says, a righteous man will treat his sons equally. And it hit me very strongly. There's 7 angels, and they will be treated equally. 7 divides evenly into 364, 52 times, just like 7 weeks in 7 days in a week, 52 weeks in a year. So each of these 7 angels, and their names are at the top that they had in real life, has 7 constellations associated. And this took me a while to solve this puzzle, by the way. And each of these is going to have 52, a total of 52 stars in their column. This is actually a map of the sky. The dragon is up at the very top of the sky, and all of these constellations are in the highest part of heaven, and it represents celestial kingdom. The next ones down are the terrestrial kingdom, celestial kingdom, and then earth, and then below the earth, these are all kingdoms of glory that are in the heaven, kingdom of God. Those are 3 degrees of glory in the kingdom of God. The earth is zodiac. There's 12 constellations in the zodiac, so some of them are going to be above, like the crab, above, and some of them are going to be below, like the balance, because 12 don't fit into 7. But anyway, the bottom 3 levels are paradise, hell, and perdition. And we often forget that or don't even know that there's 3 levels in the spirit world. A lot of people say, oh yeah, it's all the same. It's all just the spirit world. No, there's 3 levels, and the people in paradise are a whole bunch happier than the people in perdition as they're waiting for the final judgment. With that in mind, these constellations fit brilliantly. I mean, this is amazing. This slide is amazing. Just that these constellations fit here. For the purpose of the star calendar, what's important is I've got to pick exactly 52 stars from each calendar, from each, what do you call it, the column. Wait a minute, okay. Next slide. This is still part of the same criteria. Oh, I missed it. Let me go back a slide. Yeah, the criteria is 7. Okay, these are the stars I've chosen. And some of them you can see, like the balance, there's 5 stars in it. There's no star here. There's 5 stars in it, and I even have the Greek letters for them. So anybody who wants to really know about how I do the star calendar, there's the Greek letters for all 364 stars. And some of them you can see the shape, like an arrow is actually shaped like an arrow. The cup is shaped like a cup. Oh, the cup, by the way, is the extra constellation with 7 stars, which is the, I said that at the top. That's the slide. Here are the 64 stars plus 7 extra in the cup for leap years for each day of the star calendar. They're designated by the Greek letters. So there you go. Now, the next slide. This is the one where I do the total. So all 3 of these slides are on the same criterion. And we're going to go a little over. We'll have a little less time for questions today, but we got to hit all of the criteria. The number of stars in each constellation is meaningful. Yeah, that's important. 7 is the most common, and that's the number for a complete man, usually complete, like a warrior, the goat herd, the little bear, the champion. They each have 7 stars, the hunter. 12 tends to be judges. The dragon is a judge, Hercules. The scorpion is the judge, is 12. The archer, anyway, the numbers are symbolic. For instance, 8 is the number of the resurrection, and the ram has 8 stars. The Savior resurrected on the 8th day of the week, which is Sunday, because there's only 7. But 8 is resurrection, whereas 7 is the whole and complete, but 8 is the rebirth. So the number of stars is important. I mean, this was a real trick to do, I'll tell you. I spent a long time on this, but the totals for each column of that. All right, those are the first 7 criteria. Now we're going to skip up to slide, 391. And here's criteria 8. So these came well after. I got to watch the time. We may not have any questions because I only got 6 minutes left. We have 40-minute meetings. So a star day may be adjusted from its longitude by a few days to be with nearby stars in the same figure. So here is the figure of the crown. And star 1, Libra, is a holy day. It's in the balance. Libra is the balance, but you can have star 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and then star 8 is in Libra, is another holy day, and it jumps to 9. So here the stars are in order, and they're a little off from their longitude. For example, a star in Hercules is moved 4 days to the end of Virgo so that all the stars in the crown can be together and in a row. And there's going to be another one which is following the dots. We'll get to that next. But anyway, so before these last 3 criteria, my criterion was that all the stars have to be in their exact order of longitude. But then I got thinking, how are the ancients going to know the exact order of longitude, which might just be 1/100th of a degree? How accurate could they be? Well, not that accurate. The Ptolemy's tables are 1/6 of a degree. And so there has to be some slop, how much, some extra slop. Not slop. Anyway, that's a good word. And so these other 3 criteria are going to tell about how to arrange the stars So the man on the street can know they're in order. So the man on the street can remember the days 1 and 8 are holy, but all the rest are in the little crown. That's very easy to remember compared to jumping all over the place. Okay, now we go to the next criterion, which is 398. Criterion 9, a star may be adjusted from its longitude by a few days to be with other stars in the same object in the constellation. This was a huge breakthrough. The stars in the arrow, the tip of the arrow is star number 1. It's star number 1 because it's the first one. It's first one in the constellation. But the arrow has 2 stars in it. Star number 2, if it just went by longitude, you'd have this star would be first, this would be second, third, fourth, fifth, sixth, seventh. It would just go in order this way. But star number 2 is way over here in the arrow because those 2 arrows have to be together. Then the stars in the bow come together, and then the stars in the man. So this was all a huge breakthrough. That's 9. And now criterion 10. Is on slide 408. And this one is actually the most important and solves all the problems of stars that are close together. Like in Boötes, you got alpha, rho, and gamma, and they're almost in a vertical row. How do you know what order to do them in? It's connect the dots or following the dots. And it outweighs minor longitude differences. So in these, here you have 31, 32, 33, and 34 Virgo. So you put your pencil here. I'd like to make a coloring book, follow the dots, connect the dots book. And so these 2 stars were first, 10 and 11 Virgo, and then 31 to 34. And then you kind of start down here, and then you jump to other constellations and do things, 34, 35. And then you come over here, 38, 39, 40, 41, and 42. So that was the final big rule that puts all of the stars in order. So that's it. That's the end of the class. So I think we've got 1 to 2 more minutes. I'm not even going to. Well, maybe I'll try for. Let me see if there's anything on the. I'm trying to look. I don't even see the. If anybody has a question, speak up because I don't even see the chat box thing. And we have maybe 1 minute left.
On the first slide, it had something about each of the zodiac constellations had 3. Oh, never mind. You can't hear it. It sounds like a story.
I can hear you.
Okay, it said something about each of the constellations had 3 symbols or something, but there was a 48.
They have three. They each have 3 decans, 3 associated constellations with each of the 12, and those are at about the same longitude.
And what is were those decans represented in that picture? I couldn't figure what decans meant.
Yeah, the decans are all in the picture with the 12. When I had the 48 picture, 4 by 12. The 12 along the top were the zodiac, and the 3 under each of the 12 were the 3 decans that go with them.
Okay.
And those decans help tell the story. The whole thing tells the story of the gospel. And the decans tell the story. So there's just tons of stuff going on. And each of the 7 constellations for each of the 7 angels tells a story of their life. Like Peter's one of his constellations is the swan, where the swan's being crucified upside down on a cross. And that's what happened to Peter. So they refer to the 7 angels in their lives, and all of them refer to Christ. Everything refers to Christ. But each of those 7 men did something along the lines of Christ, like Moses was a deliverer, as Christ delivered. He delivered the children out of the bondage of Egypt, like Christ delivers people out of the bondage of the spirit world. I think we are done. So I'm going to end the meeting here. But thank you very much for your attention. Right. Bye-bye.